Hello and welcome to this bedtime story. Here, we listen, we relax, and we allow ourselves to drift into a peaceful sleep while we play Minecraft. I'm so glad you've joined me tonight. Together, we'll set aside the busyness of the day, release whatever worries may still linger, and settle gently into rest. This evening we'll begin a dreamy retelling of a tale you may already know. It is a story filled with imagination and wonder, and told in a way that soothes the body, quiets the mind, and helps you drift into sleep. Tonight's tale is that of Beauty and the Beast. It's a story of transformation, kindness, and the quiet strength of love. But for now, before the story unfolds, let's first take a moment to let go, and simply breathe. The story begins. Long ago, in a quiet town bordered by rolling hills and green fields, there lived a merchant named Laurent. He was a man of ambition and enterprise, one who had built his fortune on the trade of fine goods carried across the seas. His ships brought silks from distant lands, spices that perfumed the air with warmth, and treasures that dazzled the wealthy of the city. For many years, Laurent and his family enjoyed a life of comfort. Their house was filled with shining chandeliers, carved furniture, and rooms draped in velvet curtains. The merchant had 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters. And though their mother had passed some years earlier, the family lived securely in the comfort of wealth. But life, as it often does, can change in an instant. A storm upon the sea, a string of ill fortune, debts that had grown too heavy. Laurent's ships, the very foundation of his prosperity, were lost one by one. Some sank beneath stormy waves, others were seized by pirates who prowled the trade routes, and some simply never returned, swallowed by the vast unknown of the ocean. In time, his fortune was gone. The grand home, the glittering possessions, the servants who once attended the family, all had to be left behind. The merchant and his children moved to a small cottage on the edge of a quiet village. It was a humble dwelling, its walls weathered and its garden overgrown. But it was here that the family would begin again. The older children found this change most difficult. They had grown used to luxury and ease, and they often spoke with bitterness about the life they had lost. The 3 sons, though strong in body, had never learned the discipline of work. The 2 eldest daughters knew the arts of fashion and conversation, but little of housekeeping or care. Only the youngest daughter, whose name was Camille, met their new life with patience and resilience. Camille was quiet, but not timid. She had a gentle strength that came not from wealth, but from kindness and determination. While her siblings lamented the loss of their former life, Camille took to learning the skills that were now necessary. She learned to bake bread, to tend a small garden, to sew and mend clothing. She spoke kindly to the villagers, asking for advice, listening to their wisdom. And in turn, the people of the village came to admire her. Though the family as a whole struggled to fit into their new life, Camille earned a place in the hearts of those around her. In time, it was she who kept the household together. The little cottage grew warmer, tidier, more welcoming because of her efforts. Though her hands became rough with work, her spirit shone brighter each day. 2 years passed in this way. The family had adjusted, if not happily, then at least out of necessity. Yet one morning, a letter arrived that changed everything once again. The message told of a ship, one of Laurent's lost fleet, that had returned to port. Its cargo was intact, and there was hope that some of the merchant's fortune might be restored. The household was filled with excitement. The elder children dreamed aloud of the luxuries they would soon enjoy once more. Silks, jewels, fine carriages. They imagined leaving behind the small cottage and returning to their former place of prominence. Camille, however, felt differently. Though she wished happiness for her family, she had grown to love the simple life they had created. The scent of fresh bread in the morning, the small garden blooming with herbs and flowers, the kindness of neighbours, and the satisfaction of useful work. Still, she did not speak against their hopes. Instead, she smiled gently and prepared provisions for her father's journey to the city. Before he left, Laurent asked each child what gift they would like him to bring back. The elder children eagerly listed their desires: velvet gowns, jewelled brooches, embroidered hats, and shoes with silver buckles. But when he turned to Camille, she hesitated. Her father encouraged her to speak. At last, she said softly, "Father, if you could bring me a single rose, that would be enough." "We have none in this part of the country, and I have always dreamed of seeing one." Laurent chuckled at her modest request. though he promised to honour it. And with that he mounted his horse, carrying hope in his heart as he set out toward the port. The morning of Laurent's departure was calm and bright. The sky glowed with a gentle blue, streaked by soft ribbons of cloud, and the forest path shimmered with dew. Camille rose early to prepare food for his journey. She wrapped pieces of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a small flask of cider in cloth, placing them carefully in his saddlebag. Her hands moved slowly, thoughtfully, as though she wanted to pour all her love into the simple offerings. When it came time to say goodbye, she stood a little apart from her siblings. The older children waved casually, already imagining the finery they believed their father would soon bring back. But Camille's eyes followed him with a mixture of hope and unease. Though she smiled, her heart felt heavy with something she could not quite name. Laurent noticed her expression, and he bent to embrace her. "Do not worry, my dear," he whispered. "Fortune has turned in our favour at last. I will return as quickly as I can." Camille nodded, but her gaze lingered as he rode down the sun-dappled road, his figure shrinking among the trees until at last he vanished from sight. The journey to the city took 2 days, and Laurent's mind was filled with expectation. He pictured the cargo, crates of silks woven with delicate threads, jars of fragrant spices, polished ivory, and carved ornaments from distant shores. He thought of how easily he could sell these treasures, rebuild his business, and restore comfort for his children. But when he reached the port, his hopes began to unravel. The ship had indeed returned. Its sails were furled, its deck busy with workers unloading crates. For a fleeting moment, Laurent's heart lifted. But then he saw the faces of his creditors, waiting at the dock. Word of the ship's return had travelled quickly, and those to whom he owed money had wasted no time. One by one, they laid claim to the cargo. By the time Laurent reached the warehouse, the goods were already spoken for. Each jewel, each bolt of fabric, each sack of spice was taken as payment for debts long overdue. Laurent pleaded for leniency, but the merchants shook their heads. They reminded him of contracts signed, obligations unmet, promises broken by the storms and the seas. At the end of the day, Laurent was a free man, no longer in debt, but also stripped of wealth. He had nothing to carry home to his children, not the jewels they had requested, not the silks, not even the simplest trinket. He stood alone in the city, the harbour air cool against his face, the cries of gulls circling overhead. The golden light of sunset stretched across the water, and yet his spirit felt dim. What would he tell his family? How would he explain that their hopes had risen only to be dashed once more? He thought of Camille and of her modest request. A rose. So simple, and yet even that seemed beyond his reach. With a weary sigh, he mounted his horse and began the long ride home. Night fell quickly, as though the sky itself wished to cover his disappointment. Clouds gathered, thick and heavy. The air grew sharp with the scent of rain. And before long, a storm descended with all its force. The wind howled through the trees, bending branches and tearing leaves from their limbs. Lightning flared, illuminating the twisting path in sudden bursts of silver light. Thunder rolled so deeply that Laurent felt it in his chest. His horse, frightened by the noise, reared and bolted, carrying him off the familiar road and into a dark, unfamiliar forest. Laurent tried to steady the animal, pulling on the reins, speaking in calm tones, but the storm drowned out his words and the horse plunged deeper into the shadows. For what felt like hours they wandered through the tempest. Rain drenched Laurent's cloak and stung his face. The path beneath the horse's hooves turned to mud, slippery and treacherous. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, and he began to fear that he would not find shelter before the night grew too cold. At last, through the sheets of rain, a shape appeared. It was not a cottage, nor a barn, nor any humble dwelling. It was a wall, tall, looming, and built of stone so ancient it seemed to rise from the earth itself. Laurent urged his horse closer and soon discovered a great iron gate. Though it was heavy and ornate, its doors stood slightly open, swaying in the storm. With effort he pushed them wider and led his horse inside. Beyond the gate stretched a long paved path, lined with trees that swayed and whispered under the force of the wind. In the distance, through the haze of the rain, he saw a mansion, vast and imposing, its windows tall and its roof crowned with turrets. It looked like the palace of a nobleman, though there were no guards, no servants, No lanterns at the gates. Only the eerie silence of a house that seemed both welcoming and forbidding at once. Laurent hesitated. He knew he was a stranger, uninvited, but the storm offered no choice. If he did not find shelter here, he and his horse might not survive the night. So he pressed onward, hooves clattering softly on the wet stones, until at last he reached the steps of the mansion. He tied his horse beneath a sheltered archway, stroking its damp mane to calm it. Then, with trembling hands, he lifted the iron knocker on the great front door and let it fall. The sound echoed through the storm. Once, twice. No one answered. Laurent waited, shivering, the rain soaking into his very bones. Finally, with a deep breath, he pressed his shoulder against the door and pushed. Slowly it gave way, opening into a vast shadowed hall. He stepped inside, and at once the noise of the storm lessened. The air was still, cool, and strangely perfumed with the faintest hint of roses. Laurent stood in awe. The entryway was grander than any he had ever seen, even in the finest homes of the city. A staircase curved upward on either side, and statues of knights in armour stood sentinel along the walls. The floor beneath his feet gleamed with polished stone, and above him a chandelier sparkled faintly, lit by candles that burned as if they had been waiting for his arrival. He called out, his voice trembling, "Is anyone here?" No answer, only silence, and the steady flicker of candlelight. Laurent stood just inside the doorway, rain dripping from his cloak, his breath unsteady after the storm. The vast hall surrounded him in stillness, so grand and so silent that he felt as though he had stepped into a dream. He waited for a servant to appear, or perhaps the master of the house to greet him. But no footsteps approached. No voice called out. Only the soft crackle of candle flames filling the silence. With hesitant steps he moved further in. The stone floor echoed lightly beneath his boots, each sound swallowed quickly by the immensity of the room. He felt very small in such a space, as though the walls themselves were watching. At the far side of the hall he saw a pair of tall carved doors. A warm glow of light shone from the cracks around them. Drawn by the promise of warmth, Laurent pressed his hands against the doors and slowly pushed them open. Inside was a dining hall, long and elegant. A table stretched nearly the length of the room, draped in a cloth of fine linen. Upon it, a feast had been laid out. Platters of roasted meats, bowls of steaming vegetables, loaves of bread still warm, and goblets of wine that gleamed in the candlelight. Laurent stopped in astonishment. Who had prepared such a meal? For whom was it waiting? The chairs were empty, yet the food seemed freshly set, as though a gathering had been about to begin. He called out again, his voice echoing softly through the chamber. "Hello? Is someone here?" But no answer came. For a long while he lingered in the doorway, torn between politeness and desperation. He was cold, soaked to the skin, and weary from the road. Hunger gnawed at him, and the sight of the feast was almost unbearable. At last, when no host appeared, he whispered softly into the air, "Forgive me, whoever dwells here, but I am in need." With that he approached the table, sat at one of the many chairs, and cautiously took a piece of bread. It was warm and soft, flavoured with herbs. The moment he tasted it, his strength seemed to return. Encouraged, he ate more, some roasted meat, a few vegetables, and a sip of wine. Each bite filled him with comfort, as though the meal had been prepared just for him. When he was satisfied, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the hall. It was then he noticed how warm the room was, how dry his clothes were becoming in the gentle heat of a fire that crackled in the hearth. He felt himself drifting towards sleep. But before he could surrender, he thought of his horse. He could not let the animal stand cold and wet through the night. So he rose, and with quiet steps retraced his way through the hall and back outside. The storm had softened now, the rain falling lightly rather than in torrents. As he walked around the mansion, searching for shelter, he discovered something strange. Beyond the side of the house stretched a garden. Even in the dim light of the stormy night he could see its beauty. Paths of stone wound through hedges trimmed into delicate shapes. Trees arched gracefully, their leaves glistening with rain. And in the centre of it all was a sight that made him stop in wonder. A rose bush, not just one, but many. Their blossoms opened in rich colours, scarlet, ivory, soft pink and golden yellow. Despite the storm, despite the season, the roses bloomed with a perfection he had never seen before. Laurent stepped closer, the fragrance surrounding him like a gentle perfume. He thought at once of Camille and her simple wish. A rose, she had said, just one. And here, in this mysterious garden, was a rose more beautiful than any he could have imagined. Carefully he reached out his hand. His fingers brushed against the cool petals of a crimson bloom. With a gentle tug he plucked it from the branch. At that very moment the stillness of the garden was broken by a sound. A deep, rumbling voice that seemed to rise from the earth itself. "How dare you!" it thundered. Laurent spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. There, emerging from the shadows of the trees, was a figure unlike any he had ever seen. It was a beast, taller than any man, with broad shoulders, clawed hands, and eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. His mane of hair framed a face both fearsome and sorrowful, and when he stepped forward, the ground itself seemed to tremble. Laurent dropped the rose, his voice faltering. I beg your pardon. I did not mean—" "You steal from me," the beast growled, his voice low but filled with fury. "You eat at my table. You take the flower that is dearest of all. And yet you think you may leave unscathed?" Laurent fell to his knees. "Forgive me," he pleaded. "I was lost in the storm. I sought only shelter, the food, the warmth, the rose. I meant no harm. It was for my daughter. She asked only for this." The beast studied him, his glowing eyes unblinking. For a long, tense moment there was silence. Then the creature spoke again, his voice quieter but no less stern. "If your daughter desires this rose, then it is she who must pay the price." Laurent's heart froze. What do you mean?" "You will return home," said the beast, "and you will tell her what you have done. You will tell her that for this theft, either your life must be forfeit, or hers." Laurent gasped, his blood turning cold. "Please, she is young." "She has done no wrong," but the beast shook his head. "Those are my terms. One of you must return to live here in my domain for as long as I wish. If neither of you comes, then I will find you myself." The thunder rumbled faintly above as if echoing the decree. Laurent bowed his head, tears welling in his eyes. He could not defy the creature. He had no strength against such power. All he could do was accept the burden placed upon him. The beast turned and vanished back into the shadows, leaving Laurent trembling in the rain-soaked garden. The rose lay at his feet, its petals glowing faintly in the dim light. Slowly, with a shaking hand, he picked it up again. He knew it was no longer a simple gift for his daughter. It was a symbol of the fate that now hung over them all. The night passed heavily for Laurent. He did not sleep. Instead, he sat in the strange mansion, wrapped in thoughts too heavy for rest. The fire in the great hall burned low. The feast remained upon the table, though he could not bring himself to touch it again. And in his hand he clutched the rose, the bloom that had sealed his fate, its petals still fresh as though it had just been plucked. When at last dawn broke, pale and grey after the storm, Laurent gathered himself and returned to his horse. The gates of the estate creaked open as if moved by unseen hands, and when he passed through them, they swung shut again with a finality that chilled his heart. The road home stretched long before him, yet the journey felt shorter than it had before, for his mind was consumed with dread. Every step of the horse brought him closer to the moment when he would have to face his children and tell them what had transpired. At last the cottage came into view. The garden was tidy, the smoke of the morning fire curled upward, and the sound of familiar voices drifted through the air. The younger children saw him first, running out to meet him with eager faces. "Father, you've returned!" they cried. Their eyes searched his saddlebags for gifts, their hands reaching for the treasures they had imagined. But their smiles faltered when they saw his expression. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with sorrow. The only thing he carried was a single rose. The older siblings frowned with disappointment. "Is that all?" they muttered among themselves. They turned away, sullen, unable to hide their resentment. But Camille stepped forward quietly. Her gaze fell upon the flower, and she understood at once that it was meant for her. She took it gently from his hand, her fingers brushing against his as she whispered, "Thank you, father." It is more beautiful than I ever dreamed." Her smile was tender, but she saw the anguish in his eyes. Something was wrong. That evening, after supper, Laurent gathered his children around the hearth. The firelight flickered across their faces as he told them all that had happened: the journey to the city, the empty promises of fortune, the storm, the mansion, the feast, and the rose, and finally, the beast. When he spoke of the creature's demand, the room fell silent. His voice trembled as he finished. "He gave me a choice. My life, or the life of the one for whom the rose was taken. Camille, my dearest. He named you." The elder siblings gasped. 2 of them cried out in protest. Though not from concern for their sister, they wailed at the cruelty of fate, at the injustice of being dragged down yet again by misfortune. Camille's heart pounded, but her voice was calm. "And if neither of us goes?" she asked softly. Laurent shook his head, his eyes brimming with tears. "He swore he would come for us. All of us. There is no escaping his power." A heavy silence followed. The fire crackled, filling the space with a sound that seemed unbearably loud. At last Camille spoke again, her words gentle but firm. "Then I will go." Her siblings turned to her in shock. "No!" cried one. "You cannot. Why should you be sacrificed?" But Camille only smiled faintly. "Why not me? I was the one who asked for the rose. I was the one who caused this. If it spares you all from danger, then it is the right thing to do." Laurent shook his head, anguish etched in every line of his face. "Camille, I cannot allow it. You are my youngest, my dearest. I would rather give my own life than see you taken." She placed her hand upon his. "Father, if you go, the family will fall apart. You are needed here. You are our guide, our strength. But me, I can adapt, I can endure. I will go, and I will face what awaits me." Her voice carried such calm conviction that even her siblings fell silent. In their hearts they knew she spoke the truth. It was Camille who had kept the household together. It was Camille who had borne the greatest burden with the greatest grace. And now it was Camille who had stepped forward into the unknown, not with fear, but with quiet courage. The next days passed in a haze. Laurent could scarcely look at her without his heart breaking, yet Camille remained serene. She tended the garden, baked bread, and spoke gently with her brothers and sisters as though nothing had changed. But at night, when she held the rose close, she allowed herself a single tear. Not for herself, but for her father, whose heart she wished to spare from sorrow. At last the day of departure came. Laurent prepared the horse, his hands trembling as he secured the saddle. Camille packed a small bundle of belongings, though she knew not what she would need. And when the moment arrived, she embraced each of her siblings in turn. Some clung to her, their guilt heavy in their hearts. Others avoided her eyes, unable to face the courage they themselves did not possess. Finally she turned to her father. "Do not grieve, Papa," she whispered. "Perhaps this is not an end, but a beginning. Perhaps there is more to the beast than we understand." Laurent kissed her forehead, tears falling freely now. "My child," he said, his voice breaking, "you are braver than I could ever be." Together they mounted the horse and rode away from the cottage. The path stretched before them, familiar at first, then darker as they drew near the forest. Laurent's heart grew heavier with every step, but Camille sat straight, her gaze calm, her hand resting lightly on the rose she carried. The sun dipped low, and shadows lengthened among the trees. The iron gates loomed ahead, just as they had before, silent and waiting. As they opened with a groan, Camille felt a shiver run through her, but she did not turn back. The mansion rose before them, vast and mysterious, and within its walls, unseen, the beast awaited. And so, dear listener, this is where we leave the first part of our story. The path has been set, the choice has been made, and Camille steps forward into the unknown. In the next chapter, we will follow her into the beast domain, where wonder and mystery await. But for now, let your own mind rest. Let your breath soften, your body relax, and your thoughts drift away, like Camille riding into the twilight, and may sleep come to you gently, carrying you into dreams as timeless as this tale. The iron gates closed behind them with a groan, the sound echoing faintly through the forest. Laurent's heart pounded with dread, but Camille sat quietly upon the horse, her gaze steady. The rose rested in her hand, its petals as fresh as the day it had been plucked. The mansion loomed ahead, its many windows glimmering faintly in the fading light. Though it should have looked cold and forbidding, there was instead something strangely expectant about it, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Laurent helped Camille down, his hands trembling. "Are you certain, my child?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly. "Yes, Papa." "I am certain." Together they walked to the massive door. As before, it swung open at their approach, though no one was there to welcome them. They stepped inside, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the vast entry hall. At once, a glow spread through the chamber. Candles flared to life along the walls, and the scent of roses drifted upon the air. It was as though the house itself had awakened to greet them. A voice rumbled from the shadows. "Laurent, you have returned." The beast stepped forward, his form vast and terrible. Fangs gleamed in the firelight, claws curled at his side, yet his eyes were steady upon Camille. Laurent trembled, moving instinctively to place himself before his daughter, but Camille touched his arm gently. "It's all right, father," she whispered. The beast's gaze lingered upon her. "You are the one," he said slowly, "the one who wished for the rose. The one who now takes her father's place." Camille nodded, her voice calm though her heart pounded. "Yes, I am the one." For a long moment silence filled the hall. The beast's chest rose and fell with a deep sigh, a sound that seemed almost sorrowful. "So it shall be," he said at last. He turned to Laurent, his voice firm but not cruel. "You may go. She is safe within these walls. No harm shall come to her, so long as she keeps her word to remain." Laurent's knees nearly gave way with relief and despair mingled together. He embraced Camille tightly, whispering through tears, "My dearest, forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive," she replied gently. "Be strong for the others. That will give me strength as well." And with that, Laurent departed, his footsteps fading into the stormy night. The great doors closed, leaving Camille alone with the beast. Days passed, though time seemed strange within the mansion. The great halls shifted subtly, as though guided by unseen hands. Meals appeared without servants to bring them. Fires burned without tinder, and candles lit themselves at twilight. The beast was often near, though never intrusive. He joined Camille for supper each evening, his massive form hunched awkwardly at the far side of the table. His voice was deep, yet hesitant, as though unused to gentle conversation. At first, Camille answered only briefly, her manner polite but cautious. Yet over time, her heart softened. She saw in his eyes not cruelty, but loneliness, a sorrow too deep for words. One night, when silence lingered between them, the beast spoke softly. "Camille, do you find me very hideous?" She hesitated, then chose honesty. "Yes, you are fearsome to look upon, but I think the heart matters more than the face." The beast's eyes glimmered with something like hope, and after that night, their conversations grew warmer. He showed her the library, a vast chamber filled with books from every corner of the world. He guided her through enchanted gardens that bloomed with roses even in winter. And though his form remained fearsome, Camille began to feel safe in his presence. Still, she longed for her family. The memory of her father's embrace, of her siblings' voices pulled at her heart. And one evening, when the beast found her gazing wistfully from a high balcony, he asked gently, "Do you miss them?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes, I do." He was silent for a long while, then he said, "If you wish it, you may go to them, but you must promise me you will return." Her heart leapt with gratitude. She promised without hesitation. With a gesture of his clawed hand, he gave her a small ring. "Place this upon your finger when you wish to return, and it will bring you back to me." She embraced him impulsively, forgetting his fearsome form, and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, Camille awoke in her own bed at the cottage. Her family gathered around in wonder, Laurent weeping with joy at her return. For a while, all was happiness, yet whispers soon arose. Her siblings doubted her words about the beast's kindness, fearing he hid some dark cruelty. Though Camille defended him, she lingered at home longer than she meant to, her promise slipping away. One night she dreamed of him, lying pale among the roses, whispering faintly, "Camille, you promised." She woke in terror, slipped on the ring and wished to return. In an instant she was back in the darkened halls, calling his name. She found him in the garden, weak and fading. Weeping, she knelt beside him. "I will never leave you again," she cried. Her heart brimmed with truth at last. "I love you, not for your face, but for your heart." At once, light filled the garden. The beast's form dissolved, and in his place stood a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Your love has broken the enchantment," he whispered. "You have freed me, Camille." Joy and relief filled her as the mansion bloomed with life and music once more. Hand in hand, Camille and the prince walked forward, no longer bound by sorrow, but by love. And so, dear listener, the tale of Beauty and the Beast finds its gentle close, a story of courage, of promises kept, and of love that sees beyond appearances. As you drift into rest, may you too feel kindness, peace, and the sweetness of dreams. Good night.